What's up guys, it's Robin, and today on my channel I'm going to be showing you how to make this awesome Rottweiler birthday cake. So for this one we are starting out with one extra thick 10-inch layer of delicious chocolate cake, which we are just going to level out so that way it sits nice and flat on our cake board. And now we are torting this into two separate layers so that way we can add a nice thick layer of buttercream in between. And now using this very simple stencil that I created just by tracing out the image that I liked and the size that I needed, we are placing that on the cake and using a small serrated knife to gently saw away the pieces of the cake that we don't need. Now, as you guys will see in just a second when I pull the stencil away, we did come up a little bit short with the cake around the tips of the ears, so we're going to need to cut out a couple of little triangle shapes for each side just to fill that in, and we'll glue that all together with some buttercream when we assemble our cake in just a few minutes. And now we're just going to clean up this crummy mess and we can get our cake assembled. So we're going to start by smearing on a nice thick layer of chocolate buttercream onto our cake board, and that's going to act as a glue for our layers to stick to. And now we're going to lay that first layer into place, give it a little press down just to make sure it seals real good, and then we're going to fill in that center layer with a piping bag so we get a nice even thick layer all over. And now we're just going to smooth that out using an offset spatula. And now we're just going to go ahead and get that top layer into place and make sure it is straightened up and lines up good with the bottom layer. And then we're going to take a little tiny bit of buttercream, like I said, and we're going to use that as sort of a glue to help stick those little triangles on the tips of the ears. And that's a very important part. You'll want to do this because your cake will fall apart when you try to ice it later on. And don't be shy with that buttercream. Use that piping bag to get a nice big dollop on there and give it a good smush onto the cake so it seals nice and securely. Alright, now that we have the main shape of our cake, it is time to mark off some of the facial features so we can do some carving and make this look a little bit 3D. So we're just going to take our stencil once again and we're going to mark off the snout and the cheekbones and the rest of the shape of the face so we know where to cut up around the ears. And now we're just going to take our serrated knife and we're going to cut a very thin layer off the top of the ear so it sits ever so slightly lower than the rest of the face, and that's going to give it a little bit of dimension when we add our fondant later on. And now we're just going to round out this edge and soften it out a little bit so it doesn't look so harsh when we do add that fondant. Now we are taking our knife and we are going to start working on cutting out the mouth. Now this part is pretty tricky. As you guys can see, there is a very small area there on each side of the mouth that you have to cut out. So you have to be very careful not to cut too much, or that tiny little bit of cake around the lip is just going to crumble when you try to do your crumb coat. Alright, so now to finish accentuating the rest of the face. Now we're cutting out the cheeks and we're making them look a little bit more concave. And then we are going to finish off the snout by building it up and making it look a little bit more 3D. So what I did was save a little piece of the cake scrap and I cut out a little square there and we leveled that out. And now I'm taking my stencil and we are just going to mark off the rough shape that we need. So when we pull that stencil away, it should be fairly easy for us to see. And we can just simply cut away any cake we don't need. Now before we stick that snout into place perfectly, we're just going to give it a little test run to see how that looks and make sure it's sitting how we want it to. And if there's any little imperfections, now is the time to clean those up as well. And I'm just using my X-Acto knife to finish that off. I did make a little boo-boo, as you guys can see, a little piece fell off, but we're going to use a little bit of buttercream to stick that back on. So I'm just going to pipe a little border around the snout and fill that in and smooth it out, and then we're going to stick that snout into place and stick that little tiny piece that fell off where it's supposed to go. And now it is time for our crumb coat, guys. So using a small offset spatula, I'm just using some more of this delicious chocolate buttercream to apply a very thin layer over my entire cake. Now I'm starting with the nice easy flat areas to reach first, and then we're slowly going to work our way into the nooks and crannies. Now, getting into these hard to reach areas is a little bit difficult with the offset spatula. It does an okay job, but I really like to switch it up to get in there and get a nice thick layer where it needs to go. So as you guys can see, I'm using these little yellow plastic tools. Now what that is actually a smoother of sorts, and I made them myself. Instead of going out and buying a different spatula for every job, I actually go to the dollar store and I buy flexible plastic cutting boards, and I use my X-Acto knife to cut whatever shape I need. And I love to share this tip with you guys because it's such a money saver and it really does the trick for most applications. Now, once you have your cake fully covered in buttercream, you're going to want to give it another once over with your smoother just to make sure there are no lumps and bumps or imperfections, so none of those show through when we add our fondant. Alright, now it's time to get this puppy covered up. So we're starting off with a nice dark gray piece of fondant. Now this looks black, the lighting is a little bit off, but it is just a nice dark gray, and we're rolling this out nice and large to cover our entire cake with, and it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. So you're going to want to use your rolling pin to pick up your sheet of fondant so you don't get any fingerprints all over it or tear it with your hands, and you're just going to gently lay that on top of the cake and use your hands to ever so gently press the fondant into the nooks and crannies. Now when it comes to the mouth and around the cheekbones and stuff like that, you're going to want to use your Dresden tools to really get that fondant in there where you need it to go. And now that we have everything fully covered and it's all smoothed out and tucked in, we're just going to trim the excess off from around the edges. And then we're going to clean up those scraps and save them off to the side. Now be sure to seal them in some plastic wrap or a plastic baggie so that way they don't dry out on you. Alright, now it is time for some facial features. So I want to accentuate this mouth really well because we're going to actually put a small piece of black fondant in there, and I want to make sure I have enough room. And I'm also going to get in there and really accentuate that cheekbone because we're going to add some little black strips to make it look like shadows. So starting with the mouth, I'm rolling out a piece of black fondant, and I rolled this out about as thin as I can possibly get it without it tearing. And I used my stencil to mark off the pattern, and we're using our X-Acto knife to cut it out. Now I'm just picking it up and sticking that into place, and then I'm going to use my Dresden balling tool to really push it into the nooks and crannies. Now you're probably going to run into a situation of air bubbles, and it's a really quick fix. You just use a little pin or the tip of your X-Acto knife to poke a little hole, and then you can smooth that right out, and all that little air bubble should just push right out. And now it's on to the cheekbones. So I've cut out my first little strip there, and this is also rolled out really thin, so that way it lies flush basically onto the main coat of fondant. And then I'm just going to use my Dresden tool to smooth that out and fill it in a little bit. Now as you can see, I've cut out the shapes for the little brow bone with some black. And now we're going to give them some eyes. Now these are really simple. It's just a little piece of white on top of a little piece of black. And then I cut out a little circle for the pupil and another smaller circle for that little tiny dot of light in the eye. And we're just going to repeat those steps to make 2 of those and get those stuck into place. And now we can start working on his brown markings. So I've rolled out a piece of medium brown fondant, and I've marked off the pattern of the muzzle, and I'm cutting out the shape. Now you're actually going to want to cut this out ever so slightly bigger than what you think you'll need, because you'll want it to fit right down over the sides of the snout as well, and tucked up underneath and into the mouth a little bit too. And now I'm just smoothing that out ever so gently using my fingers and the back side of my hand. And I also gave him his little brown eyebrow tufts as well. Now we're moving on to the nose, and I'm starting with the little tiny piece of gray fondant that sits under the nose, and then I have cut out the actual shape of the nose itself, and now we're sticking that into place. Look at that. Oh, he's coming together. Doesn't he look so cute? And then to finish off the last little bit of brown, we're going to give him some adorable little brown cheeks. Now, I know most people wouldn't use the word adorable to describe Rottweilers. They are pretty big and scary to most people, but this guy's looking pretty friendly. And to make him extra sweet, next we're going to work on that big, goofy, slobbery smile of his. So using a nice deep red, I've rolled it out nice and thin, and I'm adding some tiny little hooked triangle-ish shapes, and those are the outer gums in his mouth. Then I've also cut out his tongue using the same color, but I've left a little tiny space in between the tongue and the gums on each side for 2 tiny little teeth in between. Now we're just going to finish off his snout with some cute little whisker marks to make him look extra cute. And then for one last final touch, I'm going to go in with some black gel food color, which is watered down a little bit. And then I'm going to use that to fill in any areas that I feel still need maybe a little bit of shading. Well guys, that's it. I think he turned out pretty cute, and I hope you guys really like him too. Now, Rottweilers aren't my favorite dog. I'm quite partial to the Australian cattle dog, and I think pugs are pretty cute too. What about you guys? What's your guys' favorite dog? I would love to hear about it in the comment section down below. Well, that's it for today, guys. I really hope you did enjoy that video. And if you did, you know what to do. Leave a big thumbs up and leave lots of love in the comment section too. If you haven't done so already and you enjoyed the video, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell so you receive a notification every time I post a new video. Thanks for watching, guys.